Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Just wrapped up talking about some NFL storylines for the upcoming offseason. Now switching gears to the NBA a little bit, where a story came out earlier this morning from Woj of ESPN talking about there were a couple different teams that reached out to the LA Lakers amidst all of his sort of drama that he was putting out into the air last week and tried to see if he was available for trade, and ultimately he stays put. It took Rich Paul, his agent, coming out after the day after the game against the Celtics where he said LeBron is not getting traded. I'm curious timeline wise how that all lined up, but this was it's very interesting to see how this all sort of played out, because you have LeBron, who was putting out all of these different signs that he wasn't happy with the Lakers. He had the post game scrum where he sort of held himself back from talking about something with his teammates, and then he posted the hourglass emoji that night. There was the instance of him putting the Knicks towel on his head. So he was definitely purposefully stirring the pot to try and force the Lakers front office hand. What we talked about last week, though, is also we're at a point with LeBron James at 39 years old where obviously they would like to have him on the team, but it's not a franchise crushing thing if he ultimately decides to leave this offseason like it was when he was in his prime. We saw what happened with Cleveland the first time, with Miami, with Cleveland again. Every time that he left, it sort of just left a little bit of a ruins for the team, and they had to piece themselves back together, because when you have LeBron James on your team, you are expecting to win a championship. And that's still the case even today. But I think that there's also some level of, when he's 39 years old, you know that you're not getting any sort of an extremely long-term commitment from him. He can, I don't know, maybe play to 42, 43 even, but at what level is he going to do that? We've seen him dip some, and we know that he can raise that floor whenever he needs to in the crucial moments of the playoffs. An example was the play-in tournament where he really cared earlier this season, the in-season tournament, I should say, earlier this year, when he really cared and he elevated his game to incredible heights. And he can still do that. We saw it in the playoffs last year, but you just can't get it on a night-in, night-out basis. What's it going to look like a few years from now? Plus the fact that LeBron is on an expiring contract, but has a player option for over $50 million. Now, LeBron, as Brian Windhorst put it for ESPN, LeBron isn't going to, because he has $50 million on the table, he is likely not going to play for anything other than $50 million next year. Whether that means going to another team or staying put, I know that there is a lot of sort of this speculation about, well, how does Bronny James's draft situation sort of play in as a factor here? It's not just as simple as you can draft Bronny with a second-round pick and then sign LeBron James for $1 million and sort of transform your franchise. It sounds like he's still trying to capitalize on the money he can make, which is very much fair. Going to be interesting to see how many other teams out there are looking to give a $50 million contract to LeBron James this upcoming offseason when he's going to be 40 next year. Now, obviously, if the Warriors and the 76ers were reaching out about it, there is clearly some interest there, and it wouldn't be shocking. I mean, I can only imagine how much money the Pistons would give to get LeBron James on their team and try and sort of jumpstart their franchise. But, I'm very curious what the packages would have looked like for the Warriors or 76ers, because you have to imagine, for the Sixers at least, Tyrese Maxey had to have been off the table. That could not have been an option. But, what else could they really have offered? They have a lot of expiring contracts. They have some picks that could possibly be thrown in there, but nothing all too tempting. The Warriors, they have some more young talent, so they probably could have put together the better package in that situation. But ultimately, the way that this all played out was the Lakers front office told these other teams that were reaching out to check in with LeBron's agency and all of that, because they didn't want to get involved. Supposedly Jeannie Buss, the president of basketball operations, I don't know what her exact title is actually, but she is supposedly very on the train of making sure that her players are on board. She's the controlling owner, so she's an executive for the Lakers. Wanted to make sure that, her players were on board, and she almost used these trade offers as a little bit of a way to check in on how committed to the Lakers LeBron was. LeBron, again, last week was sort of putting on some different antics to try and put some pressure on the Lakers front office, saying, oh, I might want to be here, I might not. You should make some moves, so I definitely want to stay. But they sort of turned. Because of that, teams reached out, and because teams reached out, they got a sense that LeBron wanted to stay for the rest of the season. LeBron and Rich Paul shut that down, and in turn, then they can just move forward with the rest of the season. They don't have to feel like there's this overwhelming amount of guilt that they should have for not making surrounding moves. And I talked about it before. I don't really think that there were the moves necessarily to, catapult them up into a higher level of contention. They played with a lot of similar guys last year in their Western Conference trip. And again, I don't think that making any sort of a panic trade and further gambling on their future was worth the risk. Now, I've been a little bit back and forth, I feel like, in terms of my opinions on going all in on a season, because I think that it depends on sort of the situation you're in. Because for the Mavericks case, as I've talked about in the past, I think that they sort of had to continue to keep digging themselves almost in a hole, but they put themselves in the position of, we are going to contend. And clearly the roster that they had through the first half of the season was never going to win a finals. Do I think that they are going to now? I mean, we'll get more so into the first impressions of the deadline moves in the next segment. I don't really, but I also think that they objectively got significantly better as of the trade deadline. And while it's still a risky move, they also have the factor of, you got to make sure your stars are happy. And the Clippers are another example of, they mortgaged so much of their future to bring in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard that at this point with the James Harden trade, and it's not like they gave up anything all too significant in that Harden trade, but it got to a point for them where you can't come up completely empty-handed after, like, it's one thing to make the risk if you are going to make a conference finals or anything like that and at least sort of sniff it, then, disappointing, yes, but at least you gave it your best shot and you can't walk away saying it was necessarily the fully wrong decision. The Clippers haven't even really... Did they make a conference finals? I know the year that Kawhi got hurt in the bubble and all of that, I think that's when they blew a lead to the Nuggets by chance to have the Nuggets advance to the Western Conference Finals after they developed a lead there. But, Kawhi dealt with injuries. Paul George, I believe, who was incredible then, he's been dealing with injuries as well. So, I don't know, a little bit of a tangent here. But I think that my point is, you have to sort of evaluate the different situations and the surrounding circumstances before going all in on a team. And with the Lakers, you sort of feel like they made the Western Conference Finals last year. They can at least get to a similar point probably with the roster that they currently have. I know it has been a less than ideal start, but I wouldn't rule them out in terms of being able to win a couple playoff series. Do I think they'll win the finals? No. But, I think that the better moves for them, they can still stay relevant this year, and then they can have a better chance of making that move that's going to put them over the edge in the upcoming offseason. So, I don't know. That was me sort of saying a lot there to give my opinions on the Lakers situation here. Now, I do find it very interesting that it is the Warriors and the 76ers that are the teams that reached out. The Warriors sort of make sense. I mean, this would have been the biggest trade in NBA history had they pulled this off. Again, I feel like they were better equipped to actually put some of the pieces together. Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody is a guy, Brandon Pajemski potentially, Trace Jackson Davis potentially. Like, they have young talent on their roster, and if I'm not mistaken, I think they have the majority of their draft capital. This is sort of the waning years of a dynasty. We'll see whether or not their front office, which a new front office in terms of GM and everything, Bob Myers stepped down this year, and it's now Mike Dunleavy. So, Dunleavy's going to have a lot of work cut out for him. If you could potentially get some of those Warriors picks down the road, it might actually end up being pretty valuable. But again, to even entertain the idea of Steph Curry playing alongside LeBron James, especially coming off of that masterclass of a game between the two of them, sometime last week, it would be actually so crazy. Like, I couldn't wrap my mind around it. Now, again, supposedly LeBron James and his agent sort of shut down the potential of him getting traded pretty quickly. They were pretty adamant he wanted to stay there in Los Angeles. That doesn't surprise me at all. I think it was more so a little bit of a power play on his end to put some pressure on the front office, but ultimately, I think he likes it out in California right now. His family is there. Bronny is playing at USC, so it makes a lot of sense that he would want to stay put. But again, the idea of Steph and LeBron together just sort of boggles my mind. That would be so crazy to see play out. And then the 76ers, I think, is just a very interesting proposition as well, where the 76ers, it wasn't totally clear what direction they were going to go in during the trade deadline. I sort of felt like going into it that you don't want to force anything too strong to try and keep yourself above water while Embiid is out, because there's a pretty good chance with Embiid's injury history especially that you're not going to get any form of the MVP Embiid that we have seen, over the past year and a half. And I'm not sure this would be the best chance for contention, even though the Eastern Conference is pretty open right now, and there's a chance. And that was sort of the way that they seem to go with the direction, not making any all too drastic moves, but they end up trading for Buddy Hield, who we will be getting into in this next segment more, but they just move off of a couple expiring contracts. I thought that the Jaden Springer trade was a little weird for them, but I mean, that's not an impact guy for this season. And ultimately, as much as I could tie in a little bit of a Celtics conversation in this, that's not what the segment at hand is about. I think that the idea of LeBron playing with Philly would be not quite as pretty as the Warriors move would have been. I mean, the basketball IQ on that Warriors team would have been insane. Between Curry, Draymond, LeBron, I think it would have just been so crazy. They probably could have gone some form of the small ball, because I also feel like, to a certain degree, not a ton of spacing there between LeBron and Draymond, but LeBron is shooting a career high in three-point percentage, so maybe that's not totally fair to say. But in Philly, I don't feel like it would have been quite as clean as a fit, especially with LeBron James playing essentially by himself. I mean, Tyrese Maxey, obviously great, but playing without Embiid for a lot of the regular season, it definitely wasn't worth testing the waters on it. Or it definitely was worth, I should say, the 76ers checking in on the situation. But I just don't really see a world where, from the package and fit wise, that is a deal that really would have worked out one way or another. So on that note, we're going to be taking our second break. We're going to be talking a little bit about the Sixers and their Buddy Hield edition and the rest of the trade deadline moves, giving some first impressions after the first few games of these old faces in new places. So stick with us after the break. We will be right back.